In fourth, now the top four, probably all teams in a similar sort of position, all on the fringe of the eight, just looking to move up. The Knights, obviously you can work out who I haven't mentioned, they're a little bit higher up and the Bulldogs are a bit lower down, but they're all looking to push into the top eight this year, top six maybe. So in fourth, I've got the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs. This was a tough one to rank because I do believe some of their signings are a little bit overrated, but overall, compared to their team last year, I do think it has improved. They brought in Corey Allen from the South Sydney Rabbitohs. I will be assuming that he will start in the fullback spot. He definitely showed signs last year, and every week he started, he got better and better. So I think that's a pretty good pickup from them. They brought in Nick Kotrick, who I talked about in the Raiders section. I do think he's on a bit too much money personally. For an outside back, but I'm sure he'll have a big impact on the Bulldogs season. They've brought in Kyle Flanagan from the Roosters to play halfback. I think that's definitely needed. The halves definitely needed someone they needed to bring someone in who can just kind of take control and just be there for the 25 rounds this year, because last year it was changing every second week. So I think Flanagan will provide that for them. They've also brought in Jack Hetherington, who I think is a pretty good signing. He was on loan at the Warriors from the Panthers. He was a bloody loose unit, so he needs to probably rein it in a little bit, but that aggression in the middle of the field is good to see. And they've also brought in Corey Waddell, who will probably just do a job for them off the bench. He came from the Manly Seagulls. They've lost Jack Cogger. He was in and out of the side every week. He went to the Super League. They've lost Foran, who couldn't really string too many games together through injury. Kerrod Holland's gone through retirement. I think he was a pretty good player, but can't really do much about someone retiring. Marcelo Montoya's gone to the Warriors. He couldn't really start. Remus Smith has gone to the Storm. He couldn't nail on a start. And Suaso Sue and Aiden Tolman are both gone, who I think are good players, but they're probably at the back end of their careers now. Suaso Sue's gone to the Knights and Tolman went to the Sharks. So overall, I think it was a pretty good season. They've got some young talent coming in. It's exciting times for them, so it'll be interesting to see how they go. They've taken some big risks there, spent a lot of money on some young players, but hopefully it pays off for the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs and their fans. Now, top three time. In at third, I've got the Newcastle Knights. The men from the Hunter, the Gaines. They've gained Tyson Frizzell from the Dragons. That's a big signing. In at second row, he's going to be replacing Sione Matautia, who has gone to St. Helens. Blake Green came in last year. Obviously, then I think he did his ACL, so I don't even know if he's fit this year, but that's a decent signing for some depth. They've also brought in Suaso Sue from the Bulldogs, who I did say is at the end of his career, but I know at his time at the Tigers, actually, he was a pretty good player, and even in his few years at the Bulldogs, I thought he always adds a little bit to games when he comes on, usually off the bench. And their losses, they didn't lose really anyone of note. They lost Herman SASA to the Titans. He was struggling to get a start. Lost Tim Glasby. He was struggling to get a start. Aiden Guerra's gone. He was kind of past his best. They lost Mason Lino, but they've brought in Blake Green to kind of replace that. Sione Matautia, that's a pretty big loss, but I'd say Frizzell is probably an upgrade on him. And they also lost Andrew McCulloch, who came in on loan from the Broncos last year, so not too much of a loss there. So overall, kind of similar to the Rabbitohs in they didn't lose too many starters, didn't gain too many starters, but that big in of Tyson Frizzell kind of changes their off-season. Now, the top two, these are probably the two most exciting teams, in my opinion, for this year. I'll talk about where I think they're going to come this year, but for the 2021 season, but in 2020, they were the two most exciting teams. I think they finished 9th and 10th, and no one really was predicting it, so excited to see how they go this year, and they've had great off-seasons. We'll start with the Gold Coast Titans in at second. They brought in Herman SASA, who, as I mentioned, couldn't really have too much impact to the Knights, but he's a talented youngster. Tino Fasil Malawi, who I think is a very underrated signing from the Storm. I think he's going to be a great player, as do most. And then they obviously brought in David Fifita, who looks like a generational talent from the Broncos. Pretty amazing that they managed to get him out of Red Hill, but excited to see what he can do in the Titans. They also brought in Patrick Herbert and Sam McIntyre, two players who might start, might be on the bench, but I think they can, just add a bit of depth. Patrick Herbert, he's a bit sloppy at times, but he can also produce a moment of magic here or there, and McIntyre will just do a job. Losses, Jai Arrow, that's obviously a big loss, but I think there's a bit of a generational shift going on at the Titans, and this next generation is going to be the generation that takes them to finals and hopefully a premiership. So they did have to move on from a few players, the likes of Ryan James, Nathan Peets, Jai Arrow, big names, but weren't necessarily performing at the best of their ability at the Titans, except for Jai Arrow, of course. Bryce Cartwright, similar. Shannon Boyd retired. Dale Copley gone. Callum Watkins released. So they did lose some big players in terms of just their stature, but not necessarily performing on the field. And I think their ins definitely outweigh the losses, and they have a really exciting future. To finish off the number one spot, I have probably a controversial one. I don't think too many people would have them here, as they, similar to the Titans, have lost a lot of players. But it's the New Zealand Warriors. Phil Gould and Nathan Brown have come in there and hosed out the club, basically, and brought in a lot of new guys. They've brought in Ewan Aitken from the Dragons, who I think is a very underrated player. I remember there was a season there where I thought he was arguably pushing for New South Wales selection. Adam Fonua-Blake's come in. I think that's a tremendous signing. I think he is the best prop on his day in the competition. Kane Evans has come in. He kind of dwindled a little bit at Parramatta. He obviously started very well in his career at the Roosters and then fell away a little bit. So excited to see if he can get back to his peak form at the Warriors. Marcelo Montoya's come in from the Bulldogs. He'll just be able to do a job. Bailey Sirenen's come in from the Rabbitohs. I think that's a pretty good signing. I think he'll be a starter for them week in, week out. And I think similar to his brother, he might turn into a really good club player, and maybe push for, city country level. So I don't even know if that's a match anymore, to be honest. But, that level, not necessarily Origin, but just a bit below that. So that's a good pickup. Ben Murdoch-Masala as well. That's a wild card coming in from Warrington Wolves. He played for Tonga a couple times and he showed glimpses. He was always a very skillful player, massive guy. So excited to see whether he's going to play, what he's going to do. I don't know much about his spot in the Warriors side. And they've also brought in Sean O'Sullivan just as some halves depth from the Broncos. Losses. A lot of the losses here I've got are actually loan players from last year, so I'll try and weed them out as I read it. Alvaro was a loan. Jared Beale retired. Adam Blair retired. Both had great careers, but were definitely past their prime. Lockie Burr left. Famasuli was a loan. Blake Green left, but that kind of happened last year. Patrick Herbert left. As I mentioned, he's a bit of an explosive player, but definitely has an error in him, so I don't think that's the worst play to let go. Jack Hetherington was a loan. George Jennings was a loan. Adam Kieran left. He showed glimpses last year and in 2019, but he just couldn't quite crack into that starting side. Isaiah Papali'i left. He had a very exciting start to his career, but he kind of dwindled a little bit late, so I think that's good for both parties that he left. And yeah, they haven't really lost too many other players. So in terms of their starting side, I think apart from the loan players, they've only lost a couple, and to bring in someone of the likes of Fonua-Blake and then guys like Evans, Aikens, Murdoch-Masala and Sirenen, I think overall they've added 4 or 5 starting players to their team, and I think that's going to make them a lot better this year. And to think that they came 9th or 10th last year, I can't quite remember, and were only a few wins off the top 8. I think that makes them a really exciting side moving into the 2021 season. I'm trying to say...
It's a miracle! Oh, yeah! What about that one? Unbelievable! Balotelli! Aguero! Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle.